Welcome to everyone around the world who's joining us today for our conversation about digital privacy post-Roe v. Wade. I am your Mozilla moderator, Kenria Rankin, and I'd like to start off by introducing our panelists. So first up, we have Amanda Bennett, pronouns she and her. Amanda is a project manager at Digital Defense Fund. There, she helps abortion access organizations with digital security and technology. Before joining the team at DDF, Amanda was the case manager at Jane's Due Process, where she helped young people navigate the Texas judicial bypass process. She also volunteers for the Bridge Collective, which helps Central Texans access reproductive health resources. When she's not doing abortion access work, she's most likely exploring local craft breweries or reading a novel. And next up, we have Jen Caltrider, pronouns she and her. Jen leads the Privacy Not Included team at Mozilla, and during a rather unplanned stint working on her master's degree in artificial intelligence, she quickly discovered that she's much better at telling stories than she is at writing code. That epiphany led to an interesting career as a journalist covering technology at CNN. Continuing down her random life path, Jen moved from CNN to digital media activism, where she helped pioneer the creative use of digital storytelling to leave the world a little better than she found it. That drive eventually led her here to Mozilla. And last, but only because of alphabetical order, we have Mutale Nkonde, pronouns she and her. Mutale is the founder and CEO of AI for the People, a communications firm that seeks to add a technical analysis to racial justice discourse. She's part of the team that introduced the Algorithmic Accountability Act to the U.S. House of Representatives, a member of the TikTok content moderation team, and she writes widely on race and technology. Her work has appeared in the New York Times and Washington Post, and she recently published an op-ed on the implications of Elon Musk's acquisition of Twitter for Slate and provided commentary on privacy concerns for Black women following the striking down of Roe. Welcome, y'all. So before we jump into our conversation, I just want to quickly acknowledge that while the fall of Roe v. Wade is a massive blow to reproductive and privacy rights in the United States and that it reverberates around the world, the reality is that people of color, queer folks, the incarcerated, immigrants, disabled folks, we've long had our reproductive rights curtailed by the United States. The reality is there's nothing new under the sun, and this is simply a further contraction of rights and expansion of impacted communities. So today, we're going to talk about the ways that those changes impact our digital privacy and how we can protect ourselves and our future. So let's start with the basics. Amanda, I'm going to ask you to help me out here. Why are we talking about data privacy in the wake of Dobbs? Like, what's at stake?
Thanks. Yeah, we're talking about data privacy because digital evidence has already been used to criminalize people for pregnancy loss. Like you just said, reproductive oppression is not new in the United States. And given the context of our surveillance state with mass incarceration, we anticipate that digital evidence will be used to prosecute people who violate new laws that criminalize abortion. But we don't have to imagine how these cases could go because they've already happened. So even though Roe established the constitutional right to an abortion, it also framed it as a decision that happened between a pregnant person and their doctor. And so groups that had actually been helping people get abortions outside of the medical system became criminalized after Roe. Groups like the Jane Collective in Chicago, where women had taught themselves how to provide aspiration abortions. So there have been cases since Roe where people have been arrested for pregnancy loss. Generally, they're reported to the police by a healthcare provider or a friend, so-called friend, or family member for a pregnancy loss that whoever snitches, they deem that pregnancy loss suspicious. And then the person is prosecuted under whatever laws can be made applicable. So it could be feticide laws, practicing medicine without a license. And the prosecutors have used digital evidence to try and prove that that person's intent was to have an abortion. So these are potential miscarriages or stillbirths that the police are trying to prove were actually abortions. And it's really hard to prove that because miscarriage and abortion present very similarly. So the evidence that the prosecutors are looking for is digital evidence like Google searches, email receipts, text messages to friends. And all these cases happened before there were laws explicitly criminalizing getting an abortion or helping someone get an abortion. But we've also seen how digital evidence is used against Black Lives Matter activists and undocumented immigrants, and how police departments have become really comfortable using dragnets like geofence warrants and keyword search warrants for all sorts of like petty crime. So we know that the use of digital evidence for criminalizing pregnancy loss is going to get worse. And it's going to disproportionately affect people who are already oppressed by surveillance and mass incarceration here.
Word. Thank you for that breakdown. And you mentioned a couple of things. Like, I know that the first thing that comes to mind for me when I think about protecting my reproductive data is like period tracker apps, right? But you mentioned a couple of other things, and I'm wondering, Jen, if you could expand on like what other tech and devices and data tools do we really need to be wary of in this moment?
Oh man, every single thing that collects data, unfortunately. It's interesting, sad, interesting to watch this play out. And I'm in the middle of researching the privacy and security of period trackers and pregnancy trackers. And, as I'm doing the research, I see how, all the data that these trackers can collect could be used to, learn about a potential abortion or lost pregnancy that could then be used to harass a woman, pursue a case against a woman. But I'm also really struck by, I'm a consumer privacy advocate. I've been doing this for years now. And, when we started, we were the crazy people that are like, oh, privacy, everything's okay. There's nothing to worry about. So they're following me around the internet to
Uh-oh, I think we may have just lost your audio, Jen. We will come back and see if we can get that going back again, okay? In the meantime, I want to bring you into the conversation, Tali. So we're ostensibly talking about online privacy, but as Jen was starting to hit on a bit, we know that what happens online doesn't stay online. So if we're thinking about privacy policies, what do we need to know about how companies share their data with law enforcement? And how does where companies are located and where we live matter when it comes to protecting our rights?
Great questions. And I'm so sorry that we lost Jen because I really was enjoying her comments. And as the resident Debbie Downer of most of the groups around this, I was like, yay, one more person like me. So a couple of different things in that question. The first part of it is the tech business model is really built on the collecting of data and then either selling through third-party brokers or in some cases like Ring Doorbell, for example, which is an Amazon doorbell, which can tell you who's coming to your door, can enter into direct relationships with police forces. So as Amanda started us off, this idea that with the Dobbs decision, we're just thinking about reproductive rights and we're just thinking about reproductive rights for people who can become pregnant. It's actually a much larger issue where we're looking at the same people who have what kind of in my work we call surveillance load are going to have this additional scrutiny. And since you're already looking at this scrutiny, there's nothing to say that a package coming to your door via Ring Doorbell that could be completely innocent falls into this kind of fact pattern of, well, the person got pills delivered to them and here's the footage. And then what we will then do is triangulate that data with an internet search. And we know it has to be this because 3 days ago they searched whatever pills on the internet and then triangulating it. And that's because when we think about data and data gathering, we think about it as being these logical steps that make sense. However, that's not the way technology works. We make inferences, we make assumptions, and those assumptions are often made to fit a particular fact pattern. And the fact pattern that's being presented, this new reality that we're in, are people who are in those ages where they're fertile and they're deciding or not deciding to have children, will now have this additional scrutiny. There was a second part to that question that I've lost, and I want to make sure that I address it.
Of course. No, it was a rather lengthy question, so I totally understand. And it was kind of looking at location, right? So if a company is in one locale and you are another, how does that impact our rights?
So I wouldn't even go to the company. I would just go to your location generally. So I live in New York City. My right to have a child or not to have a child was enshrined in New York's state law in July. So following the Dobbs decision, anybody living in New York can have an abortion up to 24 weeks. However, if I'm living in one of the 22 states that had trigger laws, that's a completely different reality. So whether the company is located in Silicon Valley or whether it's located in Spain, my physical location dictates that not only can I not action that if I'm in Oklahoma, if I'm in Mississippi, if I'm in Georgia to a certain extent, that my reproductive rights have restricted, I'm also living in states where 45% of Black women and girls live. So when we're looking at this data, I encourage us to not just to extrapolate that, right? Who is actually being affected? And that part of that population shift is economic. People cannot afford to live in northern cities because of things like gentrification. They're going down south, right? They're going to get this great home in Texas for $300,000. You can have a pool, as I'm often told. And I'm also told, I also remind them, for that same $300,000, I could not have an abortion. So maybe I should just stay in my small apartment in New York and enjoy my freedoms. But there's this movement of people who, because of other unrelated economic issues, have ended up in these states. And so it becomes extremely difficult when we do not have federal protections. Now we have an activist right-wing reactionary court, but we also have the filibuster, and we have a Congress who are not willing to act on this. And that's really pulling people that can have children back further into society. As in my work, I look specifically through the lens of the most marginalized, and that's principally Black women and Black non-binary femmes. And I'll stop there.
Awesome. No, thank you so much for that. I want to, there was something that you said when you were talking about, these 22 states that had these trigger laws. And while you live in New York, Amanda's working in Texas, where they had a trigger law from, 1929, already in place and ready to go. Amanda, can you talk to me about the communities that you see on the ground that are being most impacted by this decision?
Yeah, the abortion bans are just devastating. Anyone who is low income, which in Texas we know is disproportionately Black and brown families, it just takes so many resources to get an abortion here now. You need internet access and tech literacy just to be able to start out finding out what the law actually is, what your options actually are, where you can go to a clinic, planning travel there, the expenses of traveling to another state, missing work, finding childcare, just everything adds up. Or you need, internet access and tech literacy to be able to find out where you can reliably order safe abortion pills online. Because we know that thousands of Texans are doing that. They're ordering abortion pills online from sites based in Europe, like aidaccess.org. And even though our laws don't yet criminalize the person getting the abortion yet, right now they make it illegal to provide or help someone get an abortion. There's this sense that has been created by abortion stigma for years as well, that you're doing something wrong by seeking out an abortion and that maybe you'll go to jail. And so people, again, mostly Black and brown people who have negative experiences with the criminal injustice complex are going to feel that threat differently. And then there's also people who can't travel, people who are undocumented living in South Texas who can't get past the checkpoints 100 miles in from the border and who can't travel the other direction to Mexico either, people on probation who aren't allowed to leave the state, people who are incarcerated or in immigration detention. people in the military who can't get off base for more than a few hours. Their only option is going to be ordering abortion pills online, which are only recommended until 12 weeks of pregnancy. So those are only going to work for certain people in certain situations. And there's a legal risk, even though it, isn't explicitly criminalized to self-manage an abortion in Texas. People have been arrested for it anyway. This happened to Lizelle Herrera in South Texas a few months ago. And we also have devastating maternal mortality rates in Texas. It's already dangerous to be a pregnant person in Texas, and Black maternal mortality rates in particular are really bad because of racism. And not being able to provide abortion makes pregnancy so much more dangerous, because abortion is the treatment for ectopic pregnancy. It's the treatment for miscarriage. It's the treatment for fetal abnormalities that are incompatible with life. It's the treatment for high-risk pregnancy scenarios where the pregnant person's life is at risk. Abortion is the healthcare treatment for all of these scenarios. And so really anyone who can get pregnant is impacted by abortion bans, and people who are already experiencing reproductive coercion and disparate health outcomes because of racism and anti-Blackness, those communities are going to be most impacted.
Awesome, thank you. And not to mention, of course, the fact that one of the most dangerous times in a pregnant person's life is often when they are pregnant, right? Homicide is the number one killer for folks who are pregnant. I want to go back to something that you said, Mutale, which was that 45% of Black women are living in the South. And that brings up a question to me of what role does race play in the way that these state level laws are enacted and the ways that they're enforced?
I was just tweeting about states' rights this morning. So we have to, I think, in order to think about the role that states play in the United States, we have to also really acknowledge that the Civil War was fought because states in the South wanted to maintain the enslavement of African people, and states in the North. I'm not going to, historians don't come for me, but I'm not going to act like states in the North didn't want slavery, because they totally did, and they had it. So come for me in my mentions. But the story we're told is that the North didn't want slavery, but let's be real. And so when we think about states' rights, we're also looking at these deeply ingrained ideas that Black people are inferior to white people, and therefore within these particular locales, because we do have this kind of federal and state system, that Black people that live in certain places are going to be treated differently. So and it's really just racism. It really is just because they're Black. And what we're seeing now is obviously slavery in the way that I was describing in the Civil War has rescinded in the United States, but it's being replaced by other things. We've already talked about the criminal legal system, but we're also looking at those same states having very restrictive voting rights. So if I am a Black woman, Black femme, a Black person that can be pregnant in Texas, I'm also dealing with state level laws like Senate Bill 1 that said that won't allow me to vote through a drive-through, or is banning in-mail voting. So I can't even vote out the people that are enacting these laws. I'm literally stuck with these people. Or if I'm a pregnant person in Georgia, I now suddenly have a whole draft of restrictive laws that stop the culture of voting. I mean, the one that stands out for me in Georgia is no longer giving people water in line, which was part of a larger cultural movement of moving people to the polls and then making sure that they're comfortable. And the reason that becomes really important is when we look at, again, I live in New York State. When we look at states in the North I live in a state that has passed the John Lewis Voting Act, which is making it easier for me to vote. So if I don't like these restrictive abortion laws, which I also am not living under, I have more access to the ballot to change that, versus the 45% of Black women and girls that are living in these 22 states that have trigger laws. And so going back to your original question around the company and geography dictates not only access to privacy, which is the underlying right that was upended in the Dobbs decision, but it also dictates the underlying right to decide if and when you have children, if you are somebody that can get pregnant, and then how many children you can have. And as a mother, I look at my own right and my own ability to restrict my childbearing to 2 children is completely linked with the ability for even me to get on this Zoom or have a life outside of that. So it's something that I feel very closely and I feel very personally. And just to underscore, I lived through my pregnancy. I lived through my delivery. I lived through postpartum. But I was also in a situation where my doctor, like as my son was being born, went to get a coffee from Starbucks, and my life ended up being saved by a midwife. So this
Wow.
isn't just something that is a public debate for me. This is something that is absolutely, completely real and terrifying for all women and all people that can get pregnant, but specifically those who are poor and not white in this country.
Thank you so much for that breakdown. Jen, I'm so glad you're back. I want to circle back to the questions you were answering. We were very into your answers. You were telling us about the plethora of data tools that we need to be concerned about. If we can jump back there a little bit and go back through that. Thanks.
Yeah, sorry. I had technical difficulties, which always makes you wonder if they're watching, right?
And as you told us, they are.
Yeah, well, and that's the thing, everything is tracking us now. Everything is surveillance now. There's your Google searches, and there's your period tracking apps, and there's your phone location, and but there's also your neighbor's Ring doorbell. If you're standing in the front yard having a conversation, there's audio as well as video on those doorbells that can pick stuff up. And as we've seen recently, Amazon has a history of sharing that data with law enforcement in circumstances where maybe they shouldn't. And so everything right now in our surveillance economy is a potential thing that could spy on a woman who is pregnant, lost a pregnancy, seeking an abortion, looking to travel to a state to seek reproductive health care, things like that. And it's really scary. And as I was saying, I'm not sure when I got cut off. It was really weird because I heard muted and then I was like, what? But privacy has been a concern of Mozilla forever, and we've been talking about it. And people are like, yeah, I'm concerned about privacy, but what's the worst that's going to happen to me? They're going to track me around and show me ads. But we're starting to see some of the worst things that can happen now. And as a consumer privacy advocate that talks about this, and some people listen, it's like I feel like we're heading towards a tipping point where people realize that all this data that's out there, and all the privacy policies I read, companies make a big deal to talk about how they care about your privacy and the things they do to protect it. But a reminder that nothing is 100% secure on the internet ever. Every privacy policy just about that I read has a line in it that says just that. Nothing's 100% secure, so we can't guarantee the safety of your data. So if a law enforcement person wants to access it, how does a company approach that? That's a big thing that we're looking at now, and there's a lot of questions surrounded. Voluntary disclosure, does the company just give that up, or do they make the law enforcement come back with the subpoena and then only give limited amounts of data? Hacks, data brokers accessing data that could be used against you. It's all just really frightening. And it goes to the concerns that are being talked about here today from the other panelists, which are very real. But from a privacy perspective, we've lost our privacy, period, and stop. And we need to make changes to get that back. And I wonder if this is a tipping point where people realize, oh, it's not just ads tracking me around and Facebook knowing all about me, but now it could result in me being harassed or arrested for something as simple as seeking reproductive health care.
Thank you for that. And you mentioned that you're looking at all of these policies, and that y'all are, I know you're working with the P&I team. Y'all are going to release a reproductive health apps report in mid-August. I'm wondering, ahead of that release, what are some best practices that we should be employing? Like, knowing everything that you just said, right, about how it is, even if the policy appears to be ironclad, how it is not. What should I be doing right now to protect myself?
Yeah. Well, it's interesting as a person who's never been pregnant. Like I've talked to people that are, and tracking this stuff or want to be, and tracking this stuff is very helpful. And so I don't want to take away from that. It can be very helpful, but thinking about ways to do it where you aren't putting that data anywhere outside your own home. There's one app that we reviewed, Yuki, EUKI, that stores everything locally on your phone if you're tracking fertility. And so nothing goes out to the internet that could be hacked or accessed by police. This app even has a feature where you enter a PIN code to access it. And if somebody's requesting access to that data, and you don't want them to see your actual data, you can enter a fake PIN code that will bring up fake data. And so that's an interesting app and how they're approaching it. Still, if you're living with a partner and they know your normal PIN code, they could access that. Nothing is 100% safe. You can write things down on paper and track them that way if you need to. One thing that I found, we reviewed 10 pregnancy tracking apps, and every single one earned our privacy not included warning label, which is frightening. A couple of them are okay with privacy, but had poor security things. Some of them are just absolutely terrible at privacy. And it's because this segment of people that are getting pregnant or about ready to have a baby are a huge marketing target. And I think people should be aware of that. And so what can you do other than never leave your house and never use your phone? Just be cautious about what you share publicly and on your phone and online. And I know it's really hard, and I'm kind of a Debbie Downer here, but I also feel like I have to be, because there's just no good way to go through a pregnancy from start to finish in our world right now, where it's not going to be tracked unless you take some pretty serious steps to limit, being around surveillance cameras and your Google searches. And, everybody wants to look up baby names, and that's going to trigger things, and people are going to know this about you. So is there a good way to approach this? I haven't seen one. It's just telling people to be super cautious and, don't share things. Just don't share things. I know it's hard in this day and age to not share things, but just don't, if you can help it, which isn't a great solution, but it's where we are at right now.
Wow. I mean, that makes me think there was someone on Twitter who said that they had to buy a pregnancy test in a store to take before a surgery or something. And they used their loyalty card. And then they received formula and coupons and things in the mail, and just how they felt, their privacy had completely been invaded. And there were so many scenarios in which that could have even just been emotionally damaging, but just the greater aspect of the fact that their privacy, just because they needed to save the money. Everybody doesn't have the luxury of not using the loyalty card to save a couple of bucks. It's hard, like you said. I want to expand this conversation because so far we really talked about the United States. Mutale, can we talk about how the fall of Roe impacts the rest of the world?
Yeah, and to just add to I often tell people that I come into contact with that we should all be following the 10 crack commandments. And if you do not know the notorious BIG, you will know that number 8 is real G's move in silence. Okay.
Silence. Listen. Like lasagna.
Yes. In silence. People are not supposed to know your business. But going back to the question at hand, it's such a brilliant question, because we think about the Dobbs decision specifically impacting the United States because this is where it was made. That makes sense. But in the policy world, which I've kind of played in for most of my tech career in some way or another, there is this phenomenon called policy migration. And what that basically is a set of rules that are enacted in one part of the world are then considered by policymakers in another part of the world to see if they fit. And we're seeing this around privacy legislation in Africa right now. So my areas of interest are the United States, the UK, and sub-Saharan Africa. And if we look at the privacy if we look at privacy laws in Kenya, South Africa, and Rwanda, which is where much of this work is being done, you will find that they have really looked to the GDPR, which is the European Union's General Data Privacy Protection Act, to model some local laws. And so it doesn't take a genius to wonder whether in these kind of more repressive states that are more misogynistic in terms of their ruling protocols, they could look at Dobbs and be like, well, America is this city on the hill, it's this global leader. That's the way that we talk about ourselves on the geopolitical stage. And these are the restrictions that they're putting onto reproductive health there. That means that it could be a good fit for us. We haven't seen that yet. The Dobbs decision is not even a month old, even though it feels like it's been here for a long time, particularly those of us that are interested in feminist frameworks for policy and certainly feminist frameworks for tech policy. But this is going to happen in time. The right to privacy as an idea has been attacked in Dobbs at the same time that we're having these discussions. And so my concern is as we go down this path, it's going to give license to states, and I hate separating this, being like states that are not like the United States, that don't have strong men leadership, but we've just come out of, and we're actually really still in this era of Trumpism, and Trump was really in the mold of kind of strong man, hyper masculine, religious leadership that we see certainly in sub-Saharan Africa. And in terms of just gender and sexuality, I think it's very easy to look at what LGBTQ folks in those regions are facing, to look at the type of repression that happens for people that are viewed not as powerful on gender lines.
All right. Thank you so much for that. So, I'm going to bring it back to the US. So we know that in the 49 years since the ruling in Roe versus Wade, the federal government, has really failed to codify abortion rights. There's been a few attempts, nothing's really happened. President Biden issued that executive order that a lot of advocates feel doesn't really go far enough to protect privacy. I'm wondering, and we'll start with you, Amanda, in an ideal world, what would legislation that protects both our reproductive and privacy rights look like?
Yeah, so I'll be negative first. Ultimately, I don't have much faith in legislative solutions right now. As Mutale mentioned, the Supreme Court strategically decimated voting rights before they decimated abortion rights. For people that are in Texas, we're so gerrymandered. There's, I don't have much hope for legislative solutions here. I'll vote anyway, but we really have to learn how we can take care of each other. And these laws that criminalize helping people get abortions are really trying to make us afraid to help our friends and our family. And so the best way to resist is by knowing how to help your friends and family regardless. Things like having advanced provision abortion pills on hand. You can order these online, and knowing how to use them. But thinking about legislation, we are really in the midst of a public health emergency. A constitutional right has just been, not just restricted, but completely rescinded by the Supreme Court for the first time ever. The way that women, trans people, intersex people, and the way that children are treated in this country has been an emergency. And so I know that there has been some legislation like the My Body, My Data Act that have been introduced that are focused on reproductive health data. But I really don't think we should separate out reproductive health data from all the other data, because the ways that data is being used to criminalize people goes far beyond just pregnancy outcomes. And we need to be protecting every person from their data being used as a tool of the carceral state. We really need to take an abolitionist approach with any legislation that we do have. And so in pregnancy loss, what we've seen also so far in pregnancy loss criminalization cases, we haven't actually seen examples where software companies are getting legal requests yet. So far, in all the examples we have, prosecutors are able to get everything they need from the accused person's cell phone or laptop. They don't need to go to Google to find out their Google search because it's in the person's browser history and they have that person's phone. And so, perhaps as people learn their rights, that they don't have to talk to the police, that they don't have to hand over a phone without a warrant, that they can use digital security tactics like encrypting their phones, keeping them updated, locking them with a long pin. So even if they do hand over their phone, it's hopefully inaccessible. Maybe we'll see police start to go to the platforms instead. I think there is a, just a benefit of having privacy protections. But also people need to be, protecting the data on their phones because that's where people have been criminalized so far. And we also, just like we shouldn't be separating out just reproductive health data and really looking at all data. I don't think we should be separating out just abortion. Like any legislation needs to protect all reproductive rights and bodily autonomy. So that includes gender affirming healthcare, fertility treatments, the right to have children and not have children, and for every person to have full autonomy over their body, period.
Right. Thank you. Mutale, I'm guessing you want to add something here.
The only thing I would add is just tactical, even though I have to agree with Amanda, like we're under right-wing capture. So we have to always remind people the Nazi state was not a coup. Hitler was actually democratically elected and then dismantled the German democratic systems from within. And I think that we're in a similar moment. But if we were to think about legislation, I really like this enrichment of the equal rights protection, which is equal rights amendment, which is a strategy that's been happening over northern states. I've talked about New York enough, it's not the only one. But what that does is not require brand new laws you have to educate policymakers again. They have to get comfortable. You're speaking for 1,000 years. People are having 11 children. Nope. That we can just look at what we already have and enhance that. And then the other thing I would say, because I am definitely way more optimistic than some of the people on this call, is that privacy isn't actually dead, right? It's on life support, but you can use DuckDuckGo. And for those of you using DuckDuckGo for other things, they don't track it, but but they don't see it either. You can use Signal. You can, and to Amanda's point, which I love so much, we've just come out of COVID, so we do have traditions of mutual aid, and you can create these protective structures. And for those who don't have them, they can also watch things like this, because there is no reason for somebody that truly, 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 truly values their privacy to be using a search engine that is also actively tracking them. So there are alternatives. Those are not legislative fixes, but they are cultural fixes that we can then encode into legislation or ideas around that, if and when we ever get out of this kind of hellscape. I've never even watched this, but people always are telling me about the Handmaid's Tale, TV repeat cycle that we're currently in.
I had a question about this, and I got really excited when you mentioned it, Amanda, and like, hey, we're coming back to this. I'm wondering if we can dig into the role that collective care can play in the strategy to shore up and protect our privacy rights. Like, Amanda, you mentioned like having, abortion pills on hand. Mutale, you mentioned, mutual aid. Can we talk a little bit more about what we can do around collective care to keep because we keep ourselves safe. So what does that look like?
I mean, I can start, and then I would love to hear Jen. But we have traditions of collective action, specifically in Black communities. So from way, way, way back when, Harriet Tubman led 1,000 people to freedom from the US to Canada. That required people organizing in silence. I'm always going to go back to the 10 crack commandments. You telling everybody everything is completely playing yourself. Stop it. Just go on there to update about, like, I'm obsessed on social media with this emu called Emmanuel right now. Love it. Not not
Emmanuel who
criminalizing.
chooses violence every day. Yes.
Yes, Emmanuel choosing violence, like not criminalizing me, and I still get to play with my fake friends, right, on the internet. So we can still do those things. We need to be selective. But then the other thing, and the reason I really like the example of the Underground Railroad, is that they used allies. There were white abolitionists that were allowing these people to stay in their houses to get there. That creates a really, really good model for other ways that people in their friends, in their communities, in their wherever can start to think about as we are undergrounding abortions. Because let's be clear, abortion isn't going to stop. It's just not going to happen in the way that it has in those 22 states. What systems can we build, right? So, for example, if you're not in childbearing years, maybe you're the one, if you're completely not going to use DuckDuckGo and other encrypted searches, maybe you're the one that does the search and the pregnant person doesn't do the search. Because when they're investigating, they're not going to investigate everybody in the town. They're going to investigate that one pregnant person. Maybe this is where we pull in feminist men to put themselves, and other people that cannot have children, put themselves in the front line. But we have to become more creative about how to use people in our communities to do that work. Maybe we stop having stuff sent to our houses. You want to get pills, send them to a PO box. I think I said that right. PO box. PO box. These are all ways that we can separate ourselves and then give what I call plausible deniability. Like, my favorite thing is, if you're about to do something crazy, don't tell me so that I can say I don't know. But good luck if it's injustice, right? If you're pursuing the greater good, good luck to you. I just don't need to know about it. And we need to think in those ways. And I think it is poor people, Black people, trans people, the people that are the most marginal, that are already kind of having to live our lives in this way anyway. And I feel like the rest of society just needs to catch up.
Thank you. It's sad that it's a catch up that needs to happen though, right? Amanda and Jen, y'all want to take this one, either of you?
Sure, I'll jump in. Yeah, just building off of what Mutale said, don't post on Twitter that you'll help a stranger get an abortion. Be ready to help yourself and your friends get abortions quietly, using DuckDuckGo to search things, talking about it on Signal with the disappearing messages feature turned on. People have always helped each other have abortions, and we can all help our networks, make a plan A. Lots of people don't know what their birth control options are. Birth control fails. Even if everyone has birth control, we'll still need abortions. But people can learn about birth control and what their options are. People can learn about emergency contraception, that it's different from abortion pills. Emergency contraception works before you're pregnant. It prevents ovulation. And then, if plan B fails, have a plan C for abortion, ordering abortion pills online, having those pills on hand in your medicine cabinet if someone needs them, if you need them. And then, bringing in those digital security aspects so that you're not leaving a digital trail, using Signal and end-to-end encrypted messengers by default, just to talk to your friends, period, so that it's not suspicious, if you're opening Tor, if you're opening Signal, just using those, by default, because privacy, valuing privacy by default, not just when you really need it, because you're talking about something that's criminalized. But yeah, the less data we can give up, the less data there is to be used against us.
Thank you. And Jen, I'd love to hear from you.
Yeah, I'll just add, because I'm coming at this a little bit from a consumer perspective. And, one of the things that we do at Privacy Not Included is we tell we try and help consumers understand how to protect themselves, but we also make it clear that it shouldn't be their job to do all the privacy protections, to take all these steps. Companies should do better. Government should do better. And so if you think about this from a collective perspective, one of the things that I would love to see is, workers at Google band together and say, hey, any state that has banned abortion, we're not going to do business there. Because money talks. At the end of the day, the percent of people that really care about, the so-called murdering of babies that are anti-abortion are overlaps hugely with the people that really care about their wallets. And so if you start asking companies, internally, externally, if you work at some of these companies being like, hey, any state that has outlawed abortion, we're not going to do business there. Or I'm not going to support any company that's supporting the lawmakers that make these laws, or the states that or live and work in these states. That sort of action where it hits the pocketbook, where it hits the wallet of people, and really kind of starts to make them hurt. That seems to me like it could be some of the best collective action as well. And then it puts the responsibility. Yes, it's all our, unfortunately right now, all the responsibility is on us to protect ourselves, because the huge institutions that have all the power aren't doing a good enough job. So I think kind of also flipping this around and saying, yes, do all these things that we're recommending, using Signal and hiding your searches and supporting each other is great. But we also need to put some of the responsibility back on the people, the levers of power, the companies and the government. And that happens by hitting them in the wallet and kind of looking at actions that you can take to hurt people's money.
Love that. And it ties really neatly into the first episode of our In Real Life IRL podcast that we just put up last week, which talks about the tech that we won't build, and actually follows someone from Google who, kind of started a revolution within the organization when she found out that they were building things that she did not feel morally aligned with. I love that. And it brings up something else that I want to actually ask you to start on, Jen. Like, we've been talking about big tech, and, of course, we want to be careful not to fall into the tech solutionist gap, right, of tech fixing everything. But I'm wondering, like, how can we use tech to our advantage, and not just, these things that are kind of the workarounds in terms of like using certain browsers and certain texting apps. But how can we use technology in order to build the world that we want to build?
Well, the world that we want to be built is always built through storytelling. And that's something that technology actually gets right, is it helps us tell our stories. It helps us connect with people that can be moved by those stories. And it helps us bring people together towards action. And I think using tech in that way to to tell stories, to get people motivated. The right has had single issue anti-abortion voters for years. And, why don't we have something like that? That's like, look, if you don't support my rights as a woman, I'm out. I just won't talk to you. And doing that sort of storytelling and movement building, I think, is what tech has been astounding for. And, and so I think our side needs to be as good as the other side at using tech for those purposes. And then, tech for good, there are a lot of good tools out there that are also doing good in the world and supporting those. Of the 10 fertility tracking apps that we reviewed, and I mentioned Yuki earlier, all the others had tens to hundreds of millions of downloads in just the Google Play Store alone. Yuki, the one that is a strong privacy protecting app, had about 1,000 plus. So like getting word out, there's a lot of privacy protecting apps and technologies out there that just don't have the same marketing and ability to people just don't know about them. They aren't using them. And so getting word out, the DuckDuckGos, the Firefoxes, the Signals, the Yukis, all these things, blowing those up and saying, use this. This is, I know, the thing with Signal is like, well, my friends are on WhatsApp or, whatever, and it's hard to get them to change. Well, be bullish about it. Get out there and be bullish about, like, look, everybody get on Signal. Here's why. I know it'll take you a day to change over and it'll be a little bit different, but let's do it, because WhatsApp is owned by Facebook, and Facebook or Meta, and they're awful. They're the worst. So let's take some actions. That would be the direction that I would have. I'm eager to hear what others think, though.
Yes. What are others thinking? Let's start with you, Amanda.
Yeah, I think the more companies that can choose privacy by default so that the users don't have to, it's just built into the app. I mean, that's the ideal, because otherwise everything I had thought about, for this question it is on the user, to choose, look at the transparency reports, thinking back to that question about, who, like, how do we know what companies do, with responses to law enforcement, like, look at the transparency reports and choose something like Signal that, they can't hand over any data because they don't have access to it. you know, yeah, all I can come back to is kind of personal decisions at this point. But I hope more companies will realize that the more that we use these apps, the more companies will realize that users are valuing their privacy, and hopefully we'll get more options so it doesn't have to be so much on us.
Thank you. Mutale, you have anything you want to add here?
I would just say, and I think this just supports what was previously said, it's about case use, right? So tech is agnostic, but if you're using machine learning to get, expunge records, so you're using exactly the same engineering protocols, you're looking for patterns within large parts of data, you're looking for discrepancies to make people innocent, then I think that that's a great use of that. If you're using machine learning protocols to decide to predict how long people should stay in jail, you're using the same engineering protocol, it's just to a different end. So I think that rather than thinking about how can we use tech? It comes down to, I'd have to agree with Jen, what products are out there. And unlike Apple, who's one of market differentiators is their privacy. And they have actually gone to, the FBI has taken them to court, and all of the kind of media attention around that, really selling that to companies. I know with AI for the people, for example, one of the things that we've done, because we do a lot of Silicon Valley facing work, and those are private meetings that happen behind NDAs. But one of the things that we're always looking at as we work with these companies is how can we make this a business imperative for you? How can we make this a market differentiator for you? I actually wrote an article around algorithmic bias and company social responsibility for Harvard Business Review in 2019, which has kind of been picked up, and then we get calls. But many companies are starting to think, how do we not get caught in techlash, which is kind of the backlash to all of these? And we have solutions that people can come up with. So if we can get enough people thinking about rethinking, reimagining use case, and not basing value on, surveillance capitalism, then we are then moving towards the kind of tech sector that we want.
Awesome. Thank you. So as we get ready to wrap up, I want to ask y'all if we can future dream a bit together. We touched on it, I think, a bit disparately. I kind of want us to bring it all together. So how do we go about building the fight for bodily freedom into the ways that we construct our digital future, right? How do we integrate it so that it becomes a part of the DNA of the way that we build our future? And I'm talking products, policy, and practice, which we've talked about how important that is because it's the thing that we actually have a lot of control over. I'm going to ask each of you to answer, and I'd say you should tackle whichever one of those P's you'd like to tackle. Jen, you want to lead us off?
Oh gosh. The future I would like to live in is one where companies don't own all my personal information. I do. They're not collecting it. They're not monetizing it. It's not a business asset that they can use to make more money. It's something that I alone control, and it's nobody else's business. I'm a pretty private person. Shocking. I'm a privacy advocate. But I live atop a mountain in Colorado right now. And, I don't like the world knowing my business. And, maybe I'm from another generation. I keep reading all these stories about young people that are dating and they share location tracking with each other. And then they get in these fights when one of them turns it off. And I'm like, why in the hell are you guys sharing your location tracking with each other? Like, I know I'm old, but like privacy is nice. Like being able to just disappear for a little bit and do your own thing has its benefits. And I we're losing that sort of mentality, I think, with younger generations. And man, I'd sure love to get that back. And I'd love to start with kind of teaching people that, your body's your own, your data is your own, and it's nobody's business what you're searching online or what products you're using or what you're doing and where you're going. Keep that to yourself. So that's my dream of a future where privacy actually does matter and people see their personal information as part of their bodies almost, and they want to protect it as fiercely.
I will say, as someone, when I used to date, I also shared my information with my friends, but it was for safety. And I will say, but sometimes that kind of speaks to that trade-off that we sometimes make, right? That safety versus privacy versus information, and the things that we give up of ourselves in order to protect parts of ourselves. I'm gonna ask Amanda if you want to go next.
Sure. I think having everyone understand the fundamentals of tech literacy and sex education is such an important part. Like, that's the world that I'm dreaming of, where we have an understanding of healthy relationships and boundaries. I think, I had to learn by experience that dating controlling people who wanted access to everything about me is bad. And if I had, had the technology to share location, like, maybe they would have demanded that of me, and maybe I would have felt that I had to give it over. And so I think so many unhealthy, toxic relationships, the way that we relate to each other is normalized because of patriarchy and kind of the lack of sex ed and like this expectation that women are always supposed to sacrifice. And so really learning that like we have bodily autonomy, that boundaries are healthy, in both relationships and our relationship to technology. Understanding reproduction and really thinking through our reproductive life plans and, what we need to have the families that we want to have. It comes back to really, for me, if everybody has someone in their network that knows how to help them get an abortion safely, then we can resist these abortion bans, and you can be that person in your network. And you can also be that person for tech literacy to say, you can understand how technology works. It doesn't have to be a mystery. It doesn't have to be scary. I don't have a background in, digital security or cybersecurity. I've just had a curiosity and wanted to learn. And I think it's always so powerful when I can demystify for someone like, this is exactly how Signal protects your data. So really, getting everybody to a basic level of tech literacy and, sex ed and, not just, our bodies, but also healthy relationships. That's the dream for me.
Love that. Thank you. And then Mutale, if you can bring us home.
So at AI for the People, we tell people that we're really interested in the future of racial justice. So this is a great question for me. And the future that we're creating kind of goes back to something that Janet said. So we believe that culture is going to dictate the world that we live in. And in 2021, we actually won an Emmy for a short news segment that we collaborated with a production company on, where we were following a group of nuns that were using shareholder activism to stop the companies that they were investing in from further developing facial recognition. The nuns were quirky, they were fun, they had been buying stock since way back when, and they had been going into these shareholder meetings and basically bringing down the patriarchy. And the reason that we choose culture is that we're really interested in increasing literacy, as Amanda was saying, but we don't want to scare people into it. We want it to feel fun. We want it to feel like it's something that's accessible to them. And then next week, we actually have a film in Martha's Vineyard's African American Film Festival. That is the longest film festival name, and I get it wrong, and that might be wrong. So just be aware of that. But it's called Blackness Unbound, and what it is a conversation amongst Black people about the future of social media, where we connect with ideas and hearts, but we don't connect with each other's data. And it's kind of experimental in the way that we have done it, but it has beautiful music and it has beautiful soundscapes, and it got into the festival circuit. We made it, we do kind of artistic stuff with tech and storytelling as well as part of our practice, but we made it not thinking that it would go anywhere. And we got into the Martha's Vineyard, and we're going to be showing it again at the UN in September as part of the General Assembly, as they think about what should the digital future be for the world. And they were just really attracted to this idea that there can be a world where Black people are completely safe, and that includes being digitally safe, as well as the culture moving stuff that we do, because it is really stories. We're really interested in educating. We're really interested in educating journalists. I'm a former journalist. Jen, offline, I could talk to you about CNN too. I did my tour of duty, is what it is. I got out, but it really gave me great skills around how to tell these stories, as well as the policy work, which, to be honest, we've taken a back seat from, because you can only really impact and use policy when there's goodwill from everybody in the political spectrum. And we are in a situation where there just is not goodwill from the right. There is no respect for democracy. And so policy becomes much more of a less effective tool. But what we're doing, and it's a project that we have called Black in 2042, is using the next 20 years to develop a Black literate digital citizenry, to make sure that these themes of privacy and justice and feminism and anti-racism are embedded into our cultural products, whether it's stuff that we produce ourselves, or we've also worked with production companies who are thinking about some of these themes to embed some of these. And we're gonna have to see in our media people resisting abortion bans. That has to be normalized so that people themselves can see what they're doing. But if we don't think about the future with the urgency of now, then we're really, really doing ourselves a disservice, because this was a 49-year campaign to strike down Roe v. Wade that really became successful because people had bought into this idea that babies were being killed. And that is a lie. That is a lie. And so I would encourage other groups to also have this kind of future planning goal. And I would encourage specifically groups working in Black and Brown communities, thinking about ways of making this joyful and fun, because I don't know about my fellow panelists, but I get so much joy knowing that the few years that I'm going to spend on Earth are going to be moving towards a future that I cannot see and will not experience, but knowing that when Black people after me come, they have a greater chance of being free because of the work that I did in my life.
Well, thank you for bringing joy into the conversation. And I love that, thinking about the future with the urgency of now. I think that's a great place for us to end. I want to thank all three of you for being wonderful panelists. It was such a thoughtful conversation. And I want to thank everyone for watching. And I want to give a special thanks to our production team here at Mozilla for making this all happen. Please keep an eye on Mozilla Festival. That's our handle on Twitter. That's where we announce other dialogues and debate panels like this one. And you can subscribe to the Mozilla Fest newsletter at mzl.la/newsletter. And just a hint that there's a big announcement coming up in August. And if you can also attend the MozFest Mixer, which is going to be held in our spatial chat on August 4th. You can go to mzl.la/mixer for more information on that. And on that note, I just want to say thanks and take good care of yourselves and each other.
Thank you.